gaining insight and information and revelation. Of course, that education required me to understand things such as the New World Order, the Illuminati, and the role of many dark, sinister forces that are actively vying for control of Satan's future world government. Along the way, a lot of people tried to persuade me to see things one way or the other. Over time, I came to see that in many instances, they were partially right. They saw some truth, but they were blinded to the bigger picture because they were rigidly holding on to some preconceived philosophy about the last days. I also rejected the idea that one particular group of people were in total control. Instead, I saw that there are many factions, often competing against each other for control of this world government. No one group has monopoly. I like to think of it this way, that Satan's church has many denominations, just as the Church of Jesus Christ is made up of many denominations. Satan has done the same thing. He has many denominations, but he is the grand deceiver. He is the one with the master plan of evil. Well, one of the first books I read many years ago that really rocked my world was Malachi Martin's Keys of This Blood, Pope John Paul II versus Russia and the West for Control of the New World Order. Malachi Martin, who has passed away some years ago, wrote a stunningly shocking book about the inside workings of the Vatican and how the Vatican was competing with the West and Russia to control the New World Order. Again, Malachi Martin was a high-level Roman Catholic inside the Vatican. So this was not conspiracy theory. That book was the revelation of a high-level insider, and it shocked a lot of people. Well, there's a new book that was just released that I believe is on the same level of scholarly research and revelation as the Keys of This Blood. It is Petrus Romanus. The Final Pope is here. The co-authors are Tom Horn and Chris Putnam. The book was released just days ago, and Tom Horn is on the telephone. Tom, welcome back to True News.
Hey, Rick, as always, a privilege to get to be on your radio show, and this time around to discuss what's probably the most important research in my life, and that really is not hype or an overstatement.
Yes, you have, I think you've outdone yourself on this one, Tom. And I want to say at the beginning of this interview, because, Tom, we have a lot of Catholic listeners with True News around the world, and I want them to relax and to understand this next hour. This is not an attack on the Roman Catholic Church. This is a discussion of what I have found, Tom, many Catholics believe. I am amazed at the emails and letters I've received from Catholics who are telling me of what many Catholics suspect is happening inside the Catholic Church: the infiltration, the takeover, the penetration of the Catholic Church by the Illuminati and other dark forces. The Catholics are aware of it, Tom.
Yeah, in fact, what we do with this book is we're very careful in the beginning, in the preface of the book, to make the case that we're not interested in Catholic bashing. We're not interested in people that hate, that want to just take any opportunity they can find to bash anybody for that matter. And then what we do is we actually look at what Catholics themselves have believed for a very long time, including their most famous apparitions, prophets, seers, their theologians, an astonishing number of which, and of course, as this show goes on, we can talk about Malachi Martin too, but he was just one among a number of highly placed Vatican authorities who believed that there was a couple of things going to happen. First of all, he believed in end times prophecy. He believed in the coming of a new world order that would be the seat of the Antichrist. But he also very specifically talked about a final conclave. That's the title of one of his books, in fact, in which a final pope who would be the biblical false prophet, he would literally be under the control of Satan, that he would help give rise to the Antichrist, and that in that sense, since Vatican II, ecumenicalism had infiltrated the church, and that this was kind of the Alta Vendita, if you will, a Masonic infiltration into the hierarchy of the church to bring about not just the destruction of of what they perceive to be their true dogmas, but to use the Roman Catholic Church, which is the largest church representing Christianity in the world, which has, ambassadors. It's the closest thing to a church government on earth, that they would have to use that because that would be the powerful vehicle for the false prophet to be able to assist in the coming of the Antichrist. Now, once we get past the preface in our book, and anybody that buys this book and reads it will be astonished at the number of Catholics authorities that we're actually quoting in this book. But once they get past that opening chapter, then what we start dealing with is a 900-year-old prophecy that is ascribed to Malachy O'Morgair, who was a Catholic mystic. He's called Saint Malachy by Catholics. He's a very revered Catholic bishop, an Irish bishop, and there is a prophecy that was hidden for hundreds of years inside the Vatican that has been ascribed to him. Now, we go into the pros and cons about that. We're very fair with that prophecy, whether he actually gave it or somebody else did in his name. It's a true investigation.
And this prophecy, I think, was what, in the year 1595?
Well, it was actually published in the year 1595. What had happened was, let's see. Arnold de Wyan. Apologize about that. It took me a minute to remember his name. I think I'm getting old, Rick.
Yes, that's called a senior moment.
Well, anyway, this prophecy was hidden in the vaults of the Vatican for something like 400 to 500 years. But then, in 1595, so this over 400 years ago. Think about that. America is only 200 and some years old, so almost twice as old as the United States of America is back when a Benedictine historian by the name of Arnold de Wyan recorded the famous prophecy of the popes in his book Lignum Vitae. And the tradition around it holds that it was Saint Malachy, and that he had been called to Rome by Pope Innocent II, and that while he was there, he experienced this vision of the future popes. Every pope from his day and forward to the last one, and the last one he wrote down in a series of cryptic phrases that his name would be called Petrus Romanus, or Peter the Roman. In fact, here's the last line in his prophecy. This is the English translation of the Italian text. It says, quote, "In extreme persecution, the seat of the Holy Roman Church will be occupied by Peter the Roman, who will feed the sheep through many tribulations. When they are over, the city of 7 hills," talking about the Vatican City, "the city of 7 hills will be destroyed, and the terrible and fearsome judge will judge his people," the end. That terrible and fearsome judge is a reference to the return of Jesus Christ at the end of a tribulation period. So here you have a prophecy that very much coincides with both Catholic and evangelical eschatological thought, that implies that at a moment in time in the future, the end will come, right? There will be a time of great tribulation, that this will be preceded by a false prophet who will help the Antichrist, a political figure, gain the devotion of the world's religious communities, and then this time of great tribulation will occur, at the end of which the terrible and fearsome judge, Jesus Christ, will return and judge mankind. So that's basically a very quick synopsis of that prophecy. But here's the point. Here's why our book is pertinent and important. The very next pope on the list is Petrus Romanus, is the pope that follows the current pope, Benedict XVI. He is the next to the last on the list. And he has, everywhere he goes right now, Benedict's being wheeled around on a cart. He's getting feeble. The Vatican's owned newspapers are saying that he appears at times to be worn out. There's been speculation, even by Pope Benedict, that he might actually retire. This would be kind of unprecedented for popes, because they usually will serve until they die, but that if he's incapable of performing his duty, Benedict himself has said that he would step down potentially at his birthday in April, right? So this month. Now, I personally don't think that's going to happen, but I do think that there is very good reason to believe, for numerous reasons actually, that he will be replaced in 2012. And here's the point. No matter what anybody makes of the prophecy of the popes, you have this over 900-year-old prophecy, and it is coming to an end. The very next pope will be Petrus Romanus, according to this prophecy, and that's the end. That's the final pope. And the writer of the prophecy, ascribed to Malachy, says that this will be the pope that will help the Antichrist come to reign. Now, that's just one, by the way, of numerous things that we talk about in this book that all seem to point to something very strange going on both at the Vatican right now, but also with the year 2012. There seems to be occult signatures all over this date from numerous societies for thousands of years that looked forward to one date in particular as an event horizon, and that was the year 2012.
What are those things that you're seeing taking place at the Vatican?
Well, for one thing, believers in the prophecy of the prophecy of the popes are saying that the title Petrus Romanus, Peter the Roman, that's symbolic of the pontificate. And you know how popes name themselves after people that they respected or what they want their popery to reflect, the way they want to be remembered. And so what Catholic scholars are saying is Petrus Romanus is a name that is symbolic of what the pontificate will be of the final pope. In other words, the next pope may work to restore pre-Vatican II authoritarianism, which is kind of interesting given that the New York Times just this month, just a couple weeks ago, published a front-page article on how Pope Benedict is paving the way for the coming of Petrus Romanus by assailing disobedience among priests. That was published Thursday, April the 5th. And part of that article says this, quote, striking the tone that once earned him the moniker God's Rottweiler, Pope Benedict XVI, in a stern pre-Easter homily on Thursday, decried disobedience in the Church. Referring to recent initiatives by clerics in Austria and elsewhere, Benedict said that while such priests claim to act for concern for the Church, they are driven by their own preferences and ideas and should instead turn toward a radicalism of obedience, a phrase that perfectly captures the essence of the theologian Pope's thinking. And here's the final part of this quote. This was one of the strongest, most direct speeches of a 7-year-old reign that has more often been dominated by sex abuse scandals, repeated tangles with other faiths, and a Vatican hierarchy in disarray. It also showed that Benedict back in his element as a defender of orthodoxy, favoring a smaller church of more ardent believers over a larger community that resorts to watered-down doctrine, end quote. Well, any Catholic scholar knows that that is a direct reference to the Vatican II ecumenicalism that many, many Catholic priests, including Malachi Martin, detested and believed opened the door to what ultimately would cause Rome to become the seat not just of the Antichrist, but of the New World Order.
Mm-hmm. In defense of Pope Benedict, isn't he, what he's trying to do he's battling the liberal priests. He's trying to rein them in, the ones that are promoting gay marriage, homosexual rights, some very liberal social doctrines. Isn't that what he's trying to do?
It is what he's trying to do, but it relates to what happened at Vatican II. Vatican II was what opened the door for that kind of liberalism, and that's why people like Benedict, Malachi Martin, and numerous others believe that you can date heresy in Romanism. You can date it to the 1958 and 1963 conclaves that elected the popes, who then set in motion Vatican II, that opened the door for this kind of ecumenicalism.
Okay. But if you're a conservative Catholic, wouldn't these actions by Pope Benedict be a good thing?
Yeah, they would be, but they also are, in a sense, prophetic fulfillment, because what the prophecy, and this is the irony here, the prophecy of the popes indicated that the final pope would actually try to reinstitute a more conservative authoritarianism, call the priests back into order, get away from ecumenicalism. But now, you have to also know that there are some Catholic seers, and some of these guys have kind of a proven track record that ties to Petrus Romanus that's being echoed by them as maybe even something more than just a call back to conservatism. For instance, the man who in 2002 correctly predicted that the Pope succeeding John Paul II would be named Benedict XVI, the current Pope, is a Catholic mystic by the name of Ronald L. Conti Jr. He was correct. He predicted it before it happened, and he was absolutely right. And now he believes that the next Pope is going to take the name Pius XIII. And this name Pius is associated historically with popes who emphasized authoritative doctrine during their pontificates, and Conte interprets that qualification as best fulfilling Peter the Roman, meaning a pope who, in fact, I'll quote Conte here, who will reaffirm the authority of the Roman pontiff over the church, authority that is based on his place as a successor of Peter, who will emphasize the supremacy of the Roman Catholic faith and the Roman Catholic Church above all other religions and denominations, and its authority over all Christians and all peoples of the world, end quote. And then, here's something, Rick, you'll find interesting. Conte goes on past that, and he says, during the reign of Pope Peter the Roman, the great apostasy begins. And this pope will mark the first part of the tribulation during our generation, end quote. And then Conte goes on to describe how the biblical apocalypse is going to begin in the year 2012, when, as he sees it, Benedict is assassinated. And you know that there was another bishop in Rome not long ago who made some commentary that then made its way back to Rome, and it was considered serious enough that they actually followed up on it. They investigated it, in which he allegedly said that Benedict wouldn't live past 2012. Well, Conte said that something like 2 years ago, that Benedict would be assassinated in 2012. That's a prophecy by him, a prediction, and would be replaced by Petrus Romanus, and that then would be followed by a series of cascading events that ultimately are going to result in World War III, which is going to be triggered, according to Conte, when Iranian-backed terrorists explode a nuclear bomb in New York City, and that all of that is going to set in motion the Great Tribulation. And then in July of 2013, during World War III, Rome is destroyed, and that fulfills another part of the prophecy of the popes, in which it discusses how Rome itself will be destroyed before the return of Jesus Christ. So
that's amazing. It sounds like they're listening to true news.
Yes, and maybe he is, but again, these are what the Catholics are saying. These are what Catholic mystics are saying.
Well, you know, Tom, I was on a trip recently to Central America, and I was amazed to talk with Central American Catholics who are receiving visions and dreams about the last days. Mm-hmm. And you know what? It's in line with what the Protestants here in America are receiving also. I mean, they were talking about World War III. They were talking about riots in America. It was no different than what Christians in America are also hearing from the Lord. So what's going on here, Tom? Is the Lord's, is he just pouring out his Spirit on all flesh? Is that what's taking place? And people in all the denominations are starting to prophesy and have dreams and visions?
Yeah, well, look, here's the thing. You know, people ask me this question, because all this week I've been doing tons of radio. I did something like 8 solid hours of radio just yesterday alone. And you have those people that are staunch evangelicals that can't even accept the idea that any Catholic anywhere in the world could actually receive an accurate prediction. Then you have the Catholics that are hoping that our book, Petrus Romanus, is not just a full-on attack against Catholicism and Catholics. But somewhere in the middle, and this is a point that I've often made, is that God sometimes uses individuals that we would not suspect to inspire them to give revelation. Sometimes it doesn't fit good in our theology. For instance, it is solid evangelical theological belief to comprehend that God not only uses unlikely people, but sometimes even detestable people to transmit prophecy. For instance, recall Nebuchadnezzar's dream from the 2nd chapter of Daniel. God chose to reveal one of the most central prophecies of all time, one which the most conservative scholars, Catholic and evangelical, routinely quote and chart for end-time studies, those who are dispensationalists. This is a prophecy spanning from 605 BC through the second coming of Jesus Christ. And guess what? He gave it to an arrogant, narcissistic, pagan king, and then he required his holy servant Daniel to interpret it for said king. Again, consider how God used Balaam. Here's a sorcerer hired by Balak, the Moabite king who was afraid of the Israelites. This king who sent for the dark wizard Balaam, he lives in prophetic infamy, and yet look at how God used Balaam to prophesy in Numbers 24:17, another of one of the most central prophecies concerning the coming of Jesus Christ, in which he said, I shall see him, but not now. I shall behold him, but not nigh. There shall come a star out of Jacob, and a scepter shall rise out of Israel, and shall smite the corners of Moab, and destroy all the children of Seth. That's a prophecy. It's over 1,000 years before the birth of Christ, and from a hostile source, and yet it's probably what led the Magi to Bethlehem at the birth of Jesus Christ. So we see that God is not going to put himself in our denominational box.
I agree.
So the best thing is to make sure you just know whose side you are on, and when you see something that is heretical, well, then reject it.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not, by the way, I'm not.
You try the Spirit. You take it to the Lord and you say, Lord, is there truth in this? That's right. That's what I do. Tom, over the years, a number of Catholics have told me that a lot of Catholic prophets and seers believe that, and you alluded to this earlier, that there are prophecies inside the Catholic Church that Rome will be burned and the cardinals and the Pope will flee.
Yeah.
What do you know about this?
Oh, yeah. Well, there's numerous prophecies, including Fatima, including La Salette, that talk about how Rome will be destroyed. There's descriptions in Fatima of the Pope, crawling over the bodies of dead priests and people religious. And what I would also want listeners to this show who are not Catholic to understand is that some of these prophecies historically have been very, very accurate. For instance, evangelicals might want to consider how that the prophecy of the popes itself has only increased over time in its accuracy. I'll give you just a quick synopsis of the last 4 popes. The prophecy of the popes concerning John Paul VI, the prophecy of the Pope said that described him as Phlosphorum, or flower of flowers, which clearly matched his heraldry, his coat of arms, which had the 3 fleurs-de-lis, the flower symbol used by the French monarchy. The next Pope was John Paul I, and the prophecy of the popes described him as de mediate lunae, which means from the midst of the moon. And John Paul I is famous for having the shortest papacy in history. He only lived 33 days as a pope, and you and I have talked before about how it's widely believed that he was poisoned by Freemasonic infiltrators into Rome. But in any case, his motto in the prophecy of the popes, John Paul I was born in the diocese of Beluna. Luna is Latin for the moon, and he ascended to the papacy August 26, 1978, on the precise day of a half moon in its waning phase, which corresponds perfectly with what the prophecy of the popes said about him concerning him coming from the midst of the moon. Mm-hmm. The next prophecy was John Paul II. And the prophecy of the popes described him as coming from De Labora Solis, which means from the labor of the sun. And this prophecy is amazingly accurate in that John was born May 18, 1920, during a partial solar eclipse. Then he was buried on April 8, 2005, during a very rare hybrid eclipse over South America and the Pacific. And by the way, we verified those eclipses through NASA in research for our book. So here you have another astonishingly rare and accurate fulfillment of prophecy. And then finally we arrive at Pope Benedict XVI. The prophecy of the popes described him as Gloria Olive, glory of the olive, and of course he was born on the feast day of Saint Benedict. Then he took the name Benedict because the olive branch is the symbol of the Benedictine monks. And so again, another astonishing fulfillment of prophecy. And then now, Pope Benedict is there. He's either going to step down, be replaced, be assassinated. I hope that doesn't happen. But there's good reason to believe that in 2006, he's going to be replaced by the final pope on
2012.
Excuse me, what did I say?
2006. All right, 2012.
Well, okay, too many senior moments here.
I know, but I think it's very obvious if you've seen the Pope in recent days, his days are numbered. He looks very frail. He looks very weak. And so whether he lives out this year or next year, I mean, it's very obvious his time on this earth is limited, is clear. So we know that the next pope is coming. I think a lot of us, when he was chosen, I think a lot of people automatically knew he was like a caretaker pope.
Right.
He was not going to be here a long, long time. Going back to what I asked a few minutes ago, these prophecies about Rome burning and the Pope and the cardinals fleeing, I would assume that we're looking at Islamic war against Rome. When the Muslims think about Christianity, they automatically think Catholic Church. There's only one denomination in the minds of the Muslims. It's all Christians are Catholic. They don't really see and understand the denominational divisions in the church. They see the Pope and they see Rome as the head of the Christian church. So if there's going to be some type of action taken by Muslim jihadists to wound or destroy the Christian church, obviously they're going to aim for the Vatican. They're going to aim for the city of Rome.
Yeah, and here's something that's really interesting, is that the prophecy of the popes discusses how when Rome is destroyed, it'll be like these giant hailstones. But that's a description. What are they? Are they rockets? Are they missiles? Is it a terrorist attack? Is it a breakup of an asteroid? What we know is the prophecy is that fiery objects will fall from the sky and will destroy Rome. And it sounds very much like it's happening during a conclave, almost like they targeted specifically to wait for the election of a pope, because it talks about how all the kings of the earth would be there. They've assembled it there, which is typical of a conclave. You have representatives from all these governments of the world in Rome at that time, and they will be destroyed. Now, think about this, because there's something else really strange going on with 2012 that directly corresponds to this. Contemporaneous to the arrival of the false prophet Petrus Romanus is a prophecy from what is widely considered to be the most important work of Jewish Kabbalah, mysticism, magic, and that's in the book Zohar, which is a collection of books written in medieval Aramaic over 700 years ago. So this book was written approximately 200 years after the prophecy of the popes was given, and it contains mystical commentary on the Pentateuch, the first 5 books of the Bible. That's what most people know. Here's what they don't know, that in addition to interpreting the scripture, there is a section in the Zohar called the Ve'era section, volume 3, section 34, that includes a subsection called the signs heralding Mashiach, or in other words, the coming of the Messiah. And guess what? In the Zohar, the fascinating date that these 700-year-ago Orthodox Jewish priests prophesied that their Messiah would arrive on earth, they set it in the Jewish calendar date 5773, which in the Gregorian calendar, the calendar that we Americans are more familiar with, begins in the new moon, September this year, in the year 2012. So 700 years ago, Jewish priests, speculating when their Messiah would come, set it for the year 2012. But given the rejection of Jesus by Orthodox Jews as the Messiah, Christians, both evangelicals and Catholics, would understand that that prophecy is heralding the unveiling of the Antichrist in the year 2012. But what's also interesting about that prophecy that's in the Zohar is what they say will happen. They say that Rome will be destroyed. Here's a quote, by the way, in English from the Zohar. The Great Tribulation will begin, and then, quote, the city of 7 hills, Rome, will be destroyed, and the terrible and fearsome judge will judge his people. So it's an astonishing, almost word-for-word identical prophecy from Jewish priests who were forecasting when their Messiah would arrive, whom we would interpret to be the Antichrist, coupled with a prophecy from a 900-year-old prophecy of the popes that looks to be unfolding in parallel fashion, but both of these talking about Rome being destroyed when great hailstones fall from heaven at a time when the kings of the earth have been assembled in the city of 7 hills. Now, we could, of course, here's one thing I want people to know. One of the things we do, that's, as far as I know, it's never been done, is in the book Petrus Romanus, The Final Pope is Here. We also ask the question, why did different cultures around the world, including some occultic cultures, pagan cultures, why did they look forward specifically for thousands of years to the year 2012 as an event horizon? People mostly associate 2012, December 2012, with the end of the Mayan calendar, right? And this is when they predicted that the return of their god, Kukulkan, who is a dragon that has the power of air. In the Bible, there would be only one way to interpret what they are predicting, and that is that the war in heaven, or the return of Satan. That's the only way we could interpret that.
Who is the Prince of the Air?
The Prince of the Air. But the Aztec calendar also ends in 2012 with the return of their flying dragon god, Quetzalcoatl. The Cherokee Indian calendar ends in the year 2012 with the return of their flying rattlesnake dragon. Also, according to, now we have 2 ancient Mayan inscriptions. We had one at Tortequera, Mexico. They just recently discovered another that says in 2012 the Mayan underworld god, Bolon Yoctecu, is going to rise up. And there's something interesting we don't have time to go into, but in the Mesoamerica beliefs about Quetzalcoatl, they believe that he went into the underworld to preserve the seed and the bones of the old ones, and that at the end of this age, those will be raised with Bolon Yoctecu from the underworld. If you read the Bible, this is talking about Revelation and how from out of the bottomless pit, this spirit rises up and goes into the son of perdition. The Hindu Kali Yuga calendar ends in the year 2012 at the conclusion of the age of the male demon. That list goes on and on. Here's a couple of real quick ones that most people wouldn't know and would surprise a lot of evangelicals. 260 years ago, the leader of the very first Great Awakening in America, Jonathan Edwards, Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God, Jonathan Edwards. He was America's most important original philosophical theologian, our greatest intellectual, and he held an interesting prophetic view of the future, and we record all of this in our book. It's university-level, scholarly-level material that includes personal letters that he sent to individuals, material that he wrote. He believed that Rome would be destroyed and that the Antichrist would appear, guess in what year? 2012. And that the end of the covenant with Israel that the Antichrist formed would occur when the real tribulation, the part with the 7 trumpets and the vial judgments and that would occur in the year 2016.
Wait a minute, Jonathan Edwards?
Jonathan Edwards, and by the way, one of the things that we're doing, as you know, our book officially came out just yesterday. And one of the things we are doing, if people, they can buy the book anywhere. They can get it at a bookstore, get it at Amazon, whatever. But if they go to our website, RaidersNewsUpdate.com, or if they go to the prophecyofthepopes.com, and if they buy the book from Survivor Mall, we've made a deal with them in which we're giving away a huge library. And I mean, this is a monster big library on DVD. It's worth hundreds of dollars. They'll get it free with the purchase of that book. And on that DVD, we are including all of the research books, lost books, We're including the works by Jonathan Edwards that pointed to the year 2012. All of the material I'm referencing in this interview and others that I'm doing right now on radio and television, we're giving all of that material to people so that they can verify this for themselves, not have to take our word for it, and that includes Jonathan Edwards. But 130 years after Jonathan Edwards said that, in 1878, the famous Reverend William J. Reed here in the U.S. did the same thing, and he wrote a book called Lectures on the Revelation. We're also including that book on the free DVD collection, in which he prophesied when would the end of the papal system as we know it, when would Rome be destroyed and the end of the Catholic order as we know it, when would that happen? And he said, we are prepared to answer the question, when will the papal system come to an end? It will be destroyed in the year 2012. This 130 years, 1878, after Jonathan Edwards. Also keep in mind, in 2012, the United States is going to elect hopefully a new, but maybe the same president. We're going to get a new leader, a leader. In 2012, the United States gets new leaders. And there's one other thing that I want to point out, because this was, in my opinion, probably the apex of our research on this subject matter. During our investigation for the book Petrus Romanus, the Final Pope is Here, we went from moldy corridors in forgotten libraries in Europe, by the way, to the Sheriff's Department in Dane County, considering Malachi Martin's very good friend who was killed for what he was about to reveal concerning the final conclave and all that, which, if we don't run out of time, we can talk about. But we wound up in Dane County, Wisconsin, with a private investigator soliciting investigative material into his death. But while we were doing all that, all of a sudden, we came across an out-of-print, a very extremely rare book that was written in French, entitled The Mysterious Prophecy of the Popes. Now, this book is important because it was written by a Catholic academic. It was published in the year 1951. We searched everywhere. Fortunately, we tracked down one of the very last, maybe the last, remaining copy of this 60-plus-year-old manuscript. We worked diligently to translate it into English. We had it scanned in both French and English. And by the way, we're also giving that book away free on the DVD collection. But what we found is astonishing. Nothing short, Rick, of a real-life conspiracy code. This book was written by René Thibault, who was a Belgian Jesuit. He was an academic. He was a university instructor. Furthermore, he was a code breaker. And
Thomas, is this the French codex that's in your book? Is this what you're referring to?
That's what I'm talking about. But listen, he does a meticulous analysis of the prophecy of the popes, and I can't even begin to go into what he did on this radio show. But what happened was, the book was published, and he died almost immediately after it came out in print. He died at 69 in Egenhoven, Belgium, 1952, right after his book Prophecy of the Popes was published, and so the book immediately went out of print. That's why it's so rare. But we got the copy. He adopted in this book both the methodology of a Catholic mystic, a prophet, but also his credentials as a scholar and a mathematician, a code breaker, an anagram breaker, and makes the most unbelievable, compelling case that the prophecy of the popes is a real prophecy, regardless of what source it may have been inspired by. He kind of talks about how it could have been divinely inspired, it could have been demonically inspired. He doesn't go into that part of it, but he makes the point that it is a true prophecy, and he approaches the study from super complex, mathematical, cryptographical, grammatical, even solar activity to show from numerous improbable possibilities that something super strange, call it supernatural if you like, was involved in the prophecy of the popes. But what's most shocking, and this is why it's included in our book, is that he concluded, now keep in mind this in 1951, way before the fascination with the year 2012 of the Mayan calendar, he concluded that Petrus Romanus, the final pope, would arrive in the year 2012. So, and that part of our book, by the way, is a miniature masterpiece. It was written by my co-author, who is a theologian and an apologist, Chris Putnam. And that chapter alone, I'm telling you what, is worth the price of the ticket. It is astonishing that nobody until now came across this book and found this and put it back into print in the way that we are digitally.
Tom, what is the what's the secret in the U.S. Capitol that's connected to the Vatican?
Well, now you know that in Rome, in St. Peter's Square, there's a 330-ton obelisk, but it isn't just any obelisk. It was cut from a single block of red granite during the 5th dynasty of Egypt to stand, and I apologize for this, but to stand as Osiris's erect phallus at the Temple of the Sun in ancient Heliopolis. This is the city of On in the Bible. It was dedicated to Ra, Osiris, and Isis. The obelisk was moved from Heliopolis to the Julian Forum of Alexandria by Emperor Augustus. It was later moved from then at approximately 37 A.D. by Caligula to Rome, where it stood at the spine of the Circus, where there under Nero, its excited presence maintained a counter-vigil over countless brutal Christian executions, including the martyrdom of the Apostle Peter, according to Catholic history. Over 1,500 years following that, Pope Sixtus X ordered hundreds of workmen under celebrated engineer-architects Giovanni and Domenico Fontana to erect it in the middle of St. Peter's Square in Rome. And we go into that in our book, the daunting task, how many horses, the winches, everything it took to put it in place. But the fact is this. Many traditional Catholics, and again, I'm referring to those Catholics who have issues with what happened following Vatican II, many of them, as well as Protestants, believe that such idols as the obelisk in the center of St. Peter's Square were not only ancient objects of heathen adoration, but it represented the worship of demons. And when you think about those beliefs among evangelicals and Catholics, then when you look at the history of what motivated Pope Sixtus to erect the phallus of Osiris in the heart of St. Peter's Square, it makes it very curious. Because to ancient Christians, let me just say this as bluntly as I can and get by with it on radio, to Christians, the image of a cross and a symbol of Jesus Christ sitting atop or emitting from the head of a demonic god's erect manhood would have been at a minimum a very serious blasphemy. And yet Sixtus not only was content with restoring and using those kind of pagan relics, restoring them to the Roman square, he actually even destroyed Christian artifacts in the process of doing so, and then even performed an exorcism on the stone the day that it was erected and the symbol of Jesus was placed atop Osiris's erect phallus. Well, you can see when you look at Rome, the dome that is facing the obelisk. Now, keep in mind that if what Sixtus established in the heart of the Vatican would give some listeners pause, look at Washington, D.C., and near the west end of the National Mall, you have the obelisk that was built by Freemasons and dedicated to America's first president, and it brings the fullest meaning to the Nephilim-originated and modern porn industry impression that size matters. And I'm not being crude here. Adepts of ritual magic know that this symbolism dates back to ancient women who wanted to give birth to the offspring of the gods, and they judged the size of the male generative organ as indicative of the giant genetics or divine seed that would be needed for that offspring. And in all throughout ancient Egypt, by the way, devotion to that kind of obscene divinity occurred. It began with Amun men, who people can look up. We didn't include any of those images for understandable reasons in our book, but they can look that up at Wikipedia, Amun men. But it reached its crescendo in the obelisks of Osiris. And you and I have done shows before where we've talked about what's going on with the Freemasons there on 16th, and the raising of Osiris ceremony and what all of that symbolism stands for. But you see a mirror in Washington, D.C., of this whole obelisk Osiris belief system, you have the same mirror in the Vatican City. And so some people...
Tom, years ago, I purchased a book. It was written by an architect who was openly New Age. He spoke about it in the book, that he was a proponent of the New Age, but he was a trained architect. And the book was about his... he was excited to discover as an architect that Washington, D.C. was actually designed as a New Age replica of Rome. And he said there was there's Roman architecture throughout Washington. And he explains in the book, the New Age significance of the architecture. So people in the New Age are clearly... They clearly understand that there are hidden messages throughout Washington, D.C.
Both Washington, D.C. and the Vatican, and there's also prophecies, because remember, on the Great Seal of the United States of America is the prophecy from the Cumae Sibyl, the Novus Ordo Seclorum. And if you look at what the Mayans believed, the Mayans set the final 13-stepped countdown of their cartoons to begin in the year 1776 and to end in the year 2012. If you look at the Great Seal of the United States, you have 1776 with the 13-stepped uncapped pyramid over which hovers the eye of Apollo, which is identified in more than one place in the New Testament as the spirit that will inhabit the Antichrist. So you have a prophecy on the Great Seal, but it originated with the Cumae Sibyl. Now, how's that connected to the Vatican? Well, the Cumae sits prominently inside Catholicism's most celebrated chapel. And this painting that is in the Sistine Chapel, where there's 5 Sibyls, including the Delphic, the same kind of a Sibyl that the Apostle Paul cast a demon out of, for some reason joins the Old Testament prophets in Michelangelo's paintings in a place of sacred honor there inside that chapel. But if you look at the painting, it's interesting. A close examination. Anybody that wants to go to Wikipedia, look this up, go down to the bottom of Wikipedia and click on the painting of the Cumae Sibyl that sits inside the Sistine Chapel, and note something very interesting. On close examination, there's a secret. There's a magnificent clue which her Italian Renaissance artist left concerning her and her returning lord's origin and identity, because when you look at her, you'll find that she's got a sixth finger, a sixth knuckle. The Cumae's left thumb is inside the book in the painting that she's holding, and the fingers of her left hand are wrapped outside in standard book-holding fashion. There's clearly, visibly, an extra knuckle. So what is Michelangelo depicting here? A six-digited Cumae Sibyl, and then this, of course, connected to the return of Apollo. Because we're going to run out of time, there's no way for us to go into all of that, but there is...
Yeah, we've got about 7 minutes, and tell me, where do the Jesuits fit in all this?
Well, another thing that's interesting, you asked that, Constantino Brumidi, he migrated to the United States early on. He got connected to the Jesuits in New York City, who were considered at that time to be Rome's representative or the power base of Catholicism or whatever here in the United States, and started doing work for them. But ultimately, in the 1800s, Constantino Brumidi was sent to Mexico. It was financed actually by the Jesuits and the Freemasons. And guess what he did? He went to Mexico City, where he made copious notes of the Aztec calendar stone that ends in the year 2012. Immediately, on the conclusion of that trip, he comes back. He goes to Washington, D.C., where he meets with Quartermaster General Montgomery C. Meigs. Montgomery C. Meigs was the supervisor over the construction of the domes and the wings of the dome in Washington, D.C., and he specifically had stated that he wanted the design of Washington, D.C. to be laid out, by the way, in a way that would be similar to the Vatican City, and he also wanted artwork similar to what the Vatican had inside. So that was one of the reasons he hired or commissioned Constantino Brumidi to become the official government painter for Washington, D.C. But what does Constantino Brumidi do? I bet you it would amaze the average American. Go to Washington, D.C., take a tour of the dome, go inside the dome, and just below the apotheosis of George Washington, where he's being transformed into a god, just below that, you'll see the 72 pentagrams, which is related to Gnosticism. It's a Pythagorean binding utility, which we also don't have time to go into. But it basically what it does is it controls the 72 demons that are over the world. But just below that, in a scene that is called the Frieze of American History, of all the things that Constantino Brumidi could have painted in the Frieze of American History, he paints the picture of the Aztec calendar stone that ends in the year 2012, which, among other things, illustrates that the Freemasons were certainly aware of the belief system of the Mesoamerica, and then it also, of course, indicates there was something strange going on behind the design of the Great Seal. Mm-hmm. And just real quickly, because I never did answer your question about
the Jesuits.
Yeah, or what Jesuits and other Catholics believe about how Rome would be destroyed. This is one of the most intriguing things, and we spent a substantial amount of time in the book Petrus Romanus on this. There is testimony among numerous highly placed church experts who assert different things. First of all, that Satan worship is real and that it occurs inside the Leonine walls of the Holy See. That's astonishing, because this comes from Catholics, including Jesuits. It includes Monsignor Luigi Marinelli, whose 1999 book, Gone with the Wind at the Vatican, sold 100,000 copies in the first 3 weeks, but which discusses Satanism as being practiced by fake Catholics, cardinals in the Vatican. It includes exorcist and Archbishop Emmanuel Melango, who in his speech, if you recall, at the Our Lady of Fatima 2000 International Conference on World Peace, charged that high-ranking members of the church were in league with Satan. In fact, what's interesting is that you brought up Malachi Martin when the Manhattan Magazine in 2000 asked him what he believed about the public alarm that was kind of raised at that time over Archbishop Malongo's claim that high-ranking Vatican officials were followers of Satan. Martin replied, quote, "Anybody who is acquainted with the state of affairs in the Vatican in the last 35 years is well aware that the Prince of Darkness has had and continues to have his surrogates in the court of St. Peter in Rome," end quote. That was published by the Fatima Crusader, if people want to look that up online. Finally, there's also venerated Marian apparitions, the Fatima, apparitions, the La Salette visions, which state clearly that Rome would become the seat of the Antichrist in the end time. And then finally, and I think a lot of modern Catholics do not know this, or not aware, that predictions that Rome would become the seat of the Antichrist was a common eschatology among early high-level Catholic scholars, including celebrated theologians like Cardinal Henry Manning, Bishop Salvador Zola, Frederick William Hell, numerous others, who saw that in the last days, a demonically infested false Catholic clergy at the highest levels in Rome would subvert and use the papacy as a political vehicle for an occult world order. And, of course, Malachi Martin was one of the most outspoken believers in that, who pointed to a final conclave, which is the prophecy on the prophecy of the popes, that a final conclave is coming. The priest will be known as Petrus Romanus. That doesn't necessarily mean that his Christian name will be Peter, although it's interesting when you look right now at the Secretary of State, who some believe to be probably the most papable contender for the position of next pope, is Cardinal Peter Bertoni. And he is an Italian, so his name implies Peter the Roman.
Tom, 90 seconds. What are you expecting to happen in 2012? You put any credence in these prophecies? I mean, this is 2012, so we're going to find out if any of these things are real. But what are you expecting?
Well, all I can do is look at what's happening in the world right now. I'm not the kind of a person, I've never been super pessimistic, so I'm not the kind of a person who runs around screaming, the sky is falling, the sky is falling. On the other hand, I'm a realist, and I'm looking at the world right now, the condition of the United States, what's happening on this current presidency, and I would have to be as blind as a bat to also not see how prophecy is unfolding around us. I dare anybody to take an overview of the signs of the times as outlined in the Bible. For instance, take Matthew 24. It talks about signs in nature, famine, earthquakes, plagues. And could anybody tell me that we haven't seen an acceleration of those, exponentially so, that is unprecedented? It talks about signs in society, lawlessness, violence, immorality, selfishness, hedonism, rebellion, despair. Everywhere we look, it talks about spiritual signs that false Christs and prophets would appear. It talks about world political signs. Look at the Arab hostility right now towards Christianity and Israel. Look at Russia and its menacing opinion towards Israel. Look at what's happening in Iran. Look at the reunification of Europe. Look at the move towards a one-world economic order. And then it talks about technological signs. It talks about accelerator signs, meaning that there would be population explosion. It talks about Israel. And we have the regathering of Israel as a people, the reestablishment of the state of Israel, the reclamation of the land, the revival of the language, the resurgence of the military, the refocusing of world politics, the reoccupation of Jerusalem. All of this has happened in just our lifetimes, and so you'd have to be as blind as a bat not to realize something extraordinary is happening. And then couple that with all of these pagan societies that for thousands of years looked forward into the future, and the Maya and all of them predicted three things. Number one, that 2012 would see the distress of the nations. Number two, that it would be coupled with the return of their God. And number three, that a new form of humanity would emerge upon the earth, which then takes us back to some of the archive shows you and I did on transhumanism.
Well, it's going to be an exciting year. And the most exciting thing is that you and I, this radio audience, we are alive at a time when the saints of old, the patriarchs of the church, would have loved to have been alive to see these things come to pass on the earth, to be the witnesses on this planet in this hour, in this day. This is why I tell people, don't regret that you're alive. For a time like this, you ought to give thanksgiving to God that He chose you to be born, to be alive in this hour. That's because